The recording started here. All right. So like I said, this was just going to be an intro Mac course just to get people squared away with their Mac. A couple of housekeeping notes just to repeat some of the things I said. Everybody is pretty much muted with the exception of a few folks who are going to help me out with Q&A to kind of make the process a little easier while I go along here. Again, everybody who has registered for this course is entitled to one of the audio tutorials, whether it's the Mac or the iOS series. Pick one out, email me, let me know, and I'll send you a Dropbox link to it. You also can use, if you want to purchase additional tutorials, there's a coupon code, MacCourse20, one word, MACCOURSE20. You use that at checkout and you get a 20% discount off of any or all the tutorials that you purchase. That's Mac or iOS or the Apple slices, whatever your preference happens to be. I'm also offering to anybody who might be interested a half price, a one-on-one lesson. Sometimes these lessons in person are okay, but there's nothing that beats, having a one-on-one instructor who you can ask questions and you proceed at that person's pace. I'd be more than happy to help anybody out, whether you're a beginner, an intermediate user, or even an advanced user who's looking to do some more, significant things. One of the things I am, an Apple certified trainer, as well as an Apple certified support professional. I do teach the ACSP preparation course specifically for blind and low vision people. I am blessed. I've received the blessing from Apple directly to do this. I currently have about, 14 or 15 people that I've worked with since 2013 who have become ACSPs by way of the courses that I've taught. And again, I have gotten Apple's blessing as I can call myself a quote unquote Mac voiceover.
I have to pop out here. Sienna's calling me, John.
Say that again.
Sienna's calling me. I have to pop out.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so just to kind of get the ball rolling here. So as I said, this is all about kind of Mac and Mac OS.
Sorry about that, John. You might want to tell people what ACP stands for.
Oh, okay. Apple Certified Support Professional is ACSP. ACT is Apple Certified Trainer. They are two different certifications that are offered by Apple. I was probably one of the first blind people to go the route of both of those certifications. Wasn't easy, and I warn people it's not a simple. You just don't sit down and go, oh yeah, I want to be an ACSP tomorrow. It's a long preparation course. The guide itself is almost 1,000 pages for the pro training guide for the ACSP course. And if you want to become an Apple certified trainer, you have to take that information and go about 10 steps further. Include working with an Apple, what they call an Apple mentor, which is a head instructor. They call it a T4, a trainer instructor, who does teach backs with you. And you have to convince that person that you are capable of teaching concepts to other people. So as far as the Mac goes, obviously, since 2005, we have had VoiceOver on the Mac going back to Tiger. Some folks I know from the list of people here will probably remember Tiger. Some people have been using Mac OS going back. It used to be called Mac OS 10 back in the day, and you still hear some people wrongly call it Mac OS 10 or Mac OS X. It's just called Mac OS now. And then the iOS devices, the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod, the Apple Watch all came with accessibility after that. But the Mac was the first Apple product that had accessibility built into it. It is still supported by Apple. It is not like, a Windows screen reader like JAWS or NVDA that is supported by a third-party developer. Apple has an accessibility department with several people, several engineers employed. Contrary to some of the scuttlebutt that you read on lists, Apple does care. Apple does have an accessibility team that monitors things. Things do go wrong. You got to remember that you're dealing with accessibility being built into the regular operating system for these devices. Sometimes that does create bugs and creates problems, but believe me, from my in-house experiences, Apple does pay attention. And Sienna, you can unmute yourself, and when you need to, you and Ali and Cliff will be helping me out with the chat at the end of the session for the Q&A. Now, as far as Mac computers.
Hi, John. I'm back in.
Could you?
Okay. What was that?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could tell me how you can start a chat with someone.
You would do that through the chat participant, the chat area. There's a panel you can expand on the Mac. On the iPhone, I believe you just double tap on it and you can chat to specific people. You just want to make sure you don't do it to everyone if you just want to chat to a specific person.
What about with the Mac? Because when I go back and forward, there's no chat panel.
There's a thing that should say expand the chat panel.
Okay.
And once you do that, you got to go back to the.
Actually, John, on Mac, I'm sorry. I think on the iOS, you have to double tap the more button, then go on Mac. It's
yeah, I haven't
chat
really
panel,
messed with it. Yeah, I haven't messed with it on the iPhone.
Yeah, on iOS, you got to double tap more, and then chat should be in there somewhere.
Okay, so as far as Mac computers go, one of the first questions that I'm often asked by people, even people who have Macs in their possession and they're looking to update or buy a new Mac, is what should I get? What should I get? And my answer to that is never an easy one, because I don't like to tell people what to get, and B, it really comes down to their personal needs. The rule of thumb that I try to point out to people is your pocketbook. You know, Apple products inarguably end up being more expensive than PCs. So when you buy a Mac, you are investing in a computer that hopefully will last you several years. Macs do tend to outlast PCs. Macs also retain their value. I've seen recently, a friend of mine was looking for a used Mac. 2015 MacBook Pro was still selling on eBay for $850. So they kind of retain their value a lot more than a PC does. So you want to know, how much you're going to pay, how much you're going to drop for the computer, how much can you afford to drop for the computer. B, you want to know what your needs are. What do you plan on doing with this computer? Is this going to be just a thing you do for web browsing, email, word processing, maybe listen to some music, maybe go on YouTube, play some videos, et cetera, et cetera? Or are you looking to do more professional things, like you might get into audio engineering? Maybe you're a musician and you want to do some real serious track recordings and things like that. Maybe even as a blind person, you do some video editing with sighted compatriots. That's when you have to kind of look at the specifications and what types of Mac computers you really would be best off. So as far as laptop Macs go, you have the MacBook Air 13 that just came out recently that has the latest Intel processor. The only downside to a MacBook Air is you don't have all of the kick as far as processor potential goes of like a MacBook Pro. But for most people's purposes, I would say folks are really well off with a MacBook Air. You can't go wrong with a MacBook Air. My girlfriend has a MacBook Air. She's completely happy with it from, I think it was 2 years ago. The only thing I would say for any of the Macs is always look at RAM. Most of the Macs come with 8 gigabytes standard, but you can jack the RAM up. They usually come with 256, in most cases, 256 gigabytes of solid state drive, with the exception, I believe, of the MacBook 16-inch, MacBook Pro 16-inch, I think comes with 512 as its baseline. Most of the Macs are using the Intel, the 9th and 10th generation processors, with the exception, I think, of the iMac. The iMac, I don't think has been updated. I think the iMac is still using the 8th generation and not the 9th or 10th generation Intel processors. So you're looking at about $999 for a MacBook Air to start with. You're looking about $799 for a Mac Mini. Now, a Mac Mini is a desktop, but it's a desktop that's just a box. It does not come with a keyboard or or a monitor by default. You can purchase that yourself, or if you have keyboards or you have a monitor at home, you can use them. The rumor is that the Mac Minis you can use without a monitor. I did not find success with that. I actually had to plug in an adapter you can buy online that tricks the Mini into believing that you have a monitor connected. It's only, I think, $29 or $39, but it's fine once you do that. But the Mac Mini is the size of, maybe it's about,
I
it's
got
about the
mine for
size of
10 on Amazon.
yeah, you can get them anywhere, really. Remember,
But
guys.
just to your, what generation Mac Mini were you using? Because my 2014, even before I got that adapter, I used it just fine with with some sec. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're doing too.
Yeah,
How much
I
RAM
mean,
you
I have a
got. But I used it with
2011.
a lot of success.
I had a 2011 that I needed the adapter for. I have a 2018 that is my current desktop computer that I actually have a monitor connected to it. I have an ultra fine monitor, but it was, I believe if I disconnect the monitor, I believe it was working fine. But I've heard reports from other users using 2017, 2018 minis that needed to have an adapter, or they were getting funny things that were happening with the Mac. So just be on the safe side. I mean, you can always try it without the monitor, see what happens. But if you're getting some weird stuff happening, like Finder's not working properly, the dock doesn't always come up. Sometimes you get some Safari weirdness that has, nothing to do with necessarily with VoiceOver or the website. So stuff like that, you might be kind of a red flag that you might want to get the adapter, or at least get yourself a monitor of, a cheap, inexpensive monitor. The other Mac desktop is the iMac, which is the all-in-one. That's going to run you about, I believe, $10.99 is the baseline cost for that system for the 21.5-inch. The 27 is probably a bit higher. I didn't look at the 27's most recent price, but for a blind person, I don't think it really matters. If you're low vision and you have some vision, then you might want to consider an iMac 27. As far as the laptops go, as I said, MacBook Air, there are two versions of the MacBook Pro currently. There's a 13-inch model and a 16-inch model. Now, again, this comes down to power and what you want to be doing with the Mac. I know a few blind people that have run out and purchased the 16-inch just because it was out there. And if you got the money, then fine. It's gonna set you back at least $2,300. But compared to the regular, the 13-inch, I believe is $12.99 as a baseline cost. Now, also remember, MacBook Pro 13, MacBook Pro 16 comes with the touch bar. Some blind people are having a fit about the touch bar. I don't want to get into too much here about it. Just so you know, it is accessible, contrary to what some people are saying on some of the Mac mailing lists. The touch bar is completely accessible. You just have to play with it. You just have to learn how to use it. Once you mess with it, you learn how to customize it. It is a really, really neat little feature to include with your Mac. The MacBook Air does not come with the touch bar. Mac Pros are the real high-end Mac desktop computers. If you are a serious musician, or you're into, doing a lot of video work, you're working for a company that does high-end video rendering and stuff, that's where you jump into the realm of the Mac Pro desktop. But that's going to run you some serious cash. There is a guy out there, a blind guy, I don't think he's on this call today, who went out and bought one of the more higher-end Mac Pros a few years ago. And I think it cost him something like $4,000 or $5,000, but he does stuff. He's a studio person, so he needed that kind of power. So again, just make sure you know what you're going to do with your Mac. Make sure you know that you got, if you're going to be doing high-end stuff, you're going to want a little bit more kick. Now, remember also, when I say baseline, I mean starting costs. When you go through the Mac online store, the Apple online store, to purchase a Mac, you're going to be asked to pick, if you want to jack up the processor, if you want to jack up the RAM, you want more SSD. You can do that. It's kind of like a buffet menu. As you go down the line, you make your selections until you check out. But also keep in mind, some of you guys already know this, Apple is not cheap. So if you start jacking up the memory and stuff like that, don't have a heart attack at checkout because you're going to get hit. You're going to get hit hard. All right, so some other Mac orientation stuff. Once you got your Mac computer, the Mac world is not the same as the Windows world. The first thing that you'll notice is your keyboard. On the laptops, you have the smaller keyboard without the numeric keypad or, you know, the 6-pack or anything like that. So just to give you a quick little orientation of your keyboard, the laptop keyboard running from left to right at the bottom, you have what's called the FN key. You have a control key. You have an option key, the command, the space bar, and then going to the right of the space bar, you have the command, and you have another option key. You do not have a right side control key on the laptop keyboard. So again, the two words that might stick out for some of you is command and option. If you're a Windows person, you're probably not going to be familiar with what command or option is. Think of it this way, though. The command key is basically the equivalent of the alt key. It's to the left or the right of the space bar. Your option key is the same as what would be called the Windows key, I believe, on most of the Windows computers. And it's important to note the option key in particular because it's going to be part of your VoiceOver modifier structure, which we'll talk a little bit later here about as we go along. But beyond that, for the most part, you should be pretty familiar with the keyboard. Mac keyboards are really not that much different from the, from the Windows world. I tend, when I work with people, to suggest, and again, I use the word strongly, would suggest that you consider a full-size keyboard, simply because it's got the right side control key, which makes life a little bit easier with VoiceOver. Also having the numeric keypad allows you to take advantage of a VoiceOver feature called Numpad Commander. You also have the 6-pack that includes page up, page down, home, and end, which are very useful for VoiceOver text navigation, such as paragraph or sentence navigation. So that's really, as far as keyboards go, that's really the things you got to keep in mind. Now, if you're coming over from Windows, the thing I will try to really stress to you without getting into too much, I used to, get involved in these Mac versus PC debates from years ago. I don't really care about that stuff anymore. I've learned as an assistive technology person that, the tool that you use that gets the job done is the tool that is, as long as you're using it well, it really should only come down to the user. So I'm not going to do a Mac versus PC thing here and trash Windows, etc. But I'm just going to say a couple of things as far as the Windows mindset goes. If you're going to get into the world of the Mac, whether you're going to be a full-time Mac user or you're going to try to use both systems, which, I do, you have to remember that when you're using a Mac, you can't think Windows. In other words, sometimes I get new clients who will say to me, they'll start the words out of their mouth. Well, when I'm using JAWS, and I always stop them at that point. You got to stop thinking that way. Yes, conceptually, VoiceOver, it sets out to do the same thing as Windows does, as JAWS or NVDA or Dolphin. They set out to give blind people access to what's going on on the screen by way of speech or speech in Braille or just Braille. But, and there are some similar, I guess you'd say, reference points, which I'll mention in a moment here. But beyond that, you can't think Windows. You really cannot think Windows. If you start thinking the Mac to act like Windows, if you expect VoiceOver to act like JAWS, it's going to increase your frustration level. The other thing you got to keep in mind, I hate to break it to some of you, but even if you've been a Windows user for 20 years, 10, 20, 30 years, don't expect the Mac and VoiceOver to be a instantaneous overnight sensation. There is still a learning curve involved. You're learning a new operating system and you're learning a new screen reader. I don't know why some Windows people think that it's like osmosis. Oh, I'll just start to use a Mac and, within 15 minutes, I'm going to be an expert on this thing. It doesn't work that way. It took me 6 months of really beating the heck out of the Mac back in 2005 to really start wrapping my brain around VoiceOver. And granted, VoiceOver has come a very, very long way. And that's, my last point as far as VoiceOver and the Mac versus Windows goes. At this stage, you can't say, there used to be a time when you could say, well, you can do this in Windows, but you can't do this in Mac. You can do this in Windows, but you can't do this in Mac. With the advent of Office for Mac being fully accessible, with Duxbury for being available on the Mac, and there's also Braille Blaster. There's really, there's OCR, there's very inexpensive OCR packages for the Mac compared to Windows. So all of the major tasks you can get done on your Mac. It's just learning your screen reader. And I'm going to repeat this point again when I briefly touch on web browsing. That's the difference here. People sometimes will say, oh, I can do this better in Windows. Well, I guarantee you, I'm always willing to bet money when I see that on an email list that person didn't learn VoiceOver well. If you learn your screen reader well, you can do just about anything well, whether you're using Windows or Mac and VoiceOver. The point is you have to know your screen reader. You can't just be a casual user and then get ticked off because you think you can do something better on another operating system. So, that's, again, just from my own personal experience. I'm using Windows 10 with JAWS, as well as, the latest flavors of macOS. And I can tell you, you can do anything on either of those operating systems, as long as you know your screen reader. If you don't know your screen reader, then don't complain that something can't be done the way you expect it to be, because most likely you're not really knowing how to do that on your, on your system. So as far as some Mac terminology goes, as I said, there are similarities, but things, that are kind of, so like, for example, Finder on the Mac is like my computer in Windows. It's your file and folder structure. It's how you get around and see the things that you have on your computer. Instead of Internet Explorer, we have Safari as our web browser on the Mac. The dock, I guess you can kind of equate to some degree the taskbar, though the dock is more of a quick launch toolbar where all of, your most important apps you can quickly launch from the dock. Visually, on the Mac screen, the dock is the famous thing that runs across the bottom of the screen with all the icons. Mac people love the dock. In fact, you get some Mac users they call dock people because they do virtually everything, including their file browsing and stuff, from the dock. Apple Mail is the default default email client on the Mac, equivalent to something like a Outlook or Outlook Express, or whatever your flavor of Windows mail client happens to be. Now, Mac operating system versions are a little bit different from the Windows conventions. You obviously have Windows 10, Windows 8, Windows 7, Windows XP, etc. In the Mac world, you'll hear things like Mac OS version 10.15 Catalina, 10.14 Mojave, 10.13 High Sierra, 10.12 Sierra. So the naming conventions are a little bit different. The latest version at the time of this session is 10.15.4, I believe, Mac OS Catalina. And just for anybody who's curious, because I get asked this question a million times, yes, it's safe to upgrade to Mac OS Catalina. I still hear people saying, well, my friend told me that you shouldn't because blah, blah, blah happens. And it's really, I tell all my clients, you're perfectly fine upgrading to Catalina at this point. I beta test the Mac operating systems as soon as Apple releases or starts talking about them. I'm sure at the Worldwide Developer Conference at the end of June, they'll probably announce the next version of Mac OS, and I'll be beta testing that as well as iOS 14 at that time. And just in case people are curious, my personal opinion, and it's my personal opinion only, I am not a fan of yearly upgrades. I'm really not. And that you know, for any company that does this, not just Apple, you know, Google does it. Everybody is into this yearly update thing. And I think that does more harm to consumers than helps them, especially for people who may not be as technically savvy. You get used to using an operating system, and the next thing you know, you got to change to the next one. And I understand why people sometimes are a little leery about jumping to the next version. But just for peace of mind, Catalina is perfectly safe to upgrade to. Okay, so the cool thing about the Mac is when it comes to software updates, everything is accessible on the Mac. When the Mac goes through the update process and the Mac reboots, you can turn on VoiceOver at any time and you can get feedback. So it's not like you're left in the dark when you're installing a new version of Mac or you're updating your current version, because there is a process that's involved. The Mac will reboot, I should say, and there may be a 10 or a 15-minute series where nothing is going on, or at least you think nothing is going on. If you fire up VoiceOver, you'll get a progress bar that will tell you, you know, it's 30% completed or whatever. Then the Mac will reboot again, and there will be a what they call a setup assistant screen that will appear as the operating system is being optimized and your data is being optimized. It does not erase any data when you do an update from a previous version or even an upgrade from a previous version. Let's say you jump from Mojave to Catalina, or even if you jump from, like, you know, a High Sierra or Sierra all the way up to Catalina, you're not going to lose your user data. With that being said, though, I always tell people, back up, back up, back up. So many computer users, whether you're a Windows or a Mac user, do not back up their data, and it is really foolish not to do it. On a Mac, you have something called Time Machine. It is an automatic backup system. All you require is an external disk, and you just connect that up to your Mac, and you can back up. It does it automatically. The only caveat to this, I got to point out before somebody comes back and yells at me later, when you install, when you run Time Machine for the first time, it will erase everything on that disk because it reformats the disk into a Mac OS version, operating system version. So don't use a disk that's got data on it for Time Machine. Use a blank disk to be on the safe side. Okay, we talked about what the Finder is for file management and folders. Basically, you have what's called the root directory, which is where your applications are. People will always ask, "Well, where are my apps? Where are my apps on the Mac?" The actual place where they're located is in your applications folder when you open up your hard drive. Now, in the Mac world, it is not the C drive. It is Macintosh HD. You can rename it to C if that makes you feel warm and fuzzy. You can call it Charlie. You can call it, you know, Snoopy, whatever you want. That's the thing about the Mac, is you can rename your hard drive at will, and it doesn't affect or impact anything going wrong. For example, on my Mac Mini, my hard drive is called Kahuna. On my laptop, it's called Junior. So you can, and I apologize for my voice. Allergies, pollen, grass is really high today, and it is really, really killing me. So I apologize for having to take sips of water to try to get myself not sounding so raspy. Okay. So as I said, the best way to launch applications is by way of the dock, because the dock is Apple puts shortcuts to all the more popular or the more commonly used apps. So you'll find Safari, you'll find Mail, you'll find Music, which was formerly iTunes. If you have older versions of Mac operating systems, it used to be called iTunes. But as of Catalina, just like they did in iOS, years ago, they broke up the iTunes app into the Music app, the Podcasts app, the TV app. So they've done that in macOS as well. And all of those apps will be on your dock, so you can launch them at any time. Okay, I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything. Now, as far as controlling your Mac or configuring your Mac goes, you're going to become familiar with what's called system preferences. I will tell you from experience, system preferences is a lot easier to handle than the Windows control panel and all the levels and intricacies of trying to navigate and find stuff in the Windows control panel. So the system preferences pane is very easy. It's just a series of your different options like print and scan, time machine, accessibility, display, etc. So you probably spend your share of time on occasion going in there to, maybe check your network settings, things like that. But it's very easy from a Mac user's perspective once you know your way around. Which brings me to a little note I also want to mention before I forget, because I was always afraid I'm going to forget to talk about this. As far as preparing yourself for the Mac, obviously, I'm going to give myself a self plug on my website. I do have a lot of demonstration material for free. I have the audio tutorial series available, but also use places like AppleViz. They have got a lot of information and free tutorials and stuff available on there. There is a great website called takecontrolbooks.com, www.takecontrolbooks.com. Joe Kessel, I believe, is now the one who runs that with Adam and Tanya Yangst. But that is a great repository of take control books about everything Mac and iOS related. So, for example, take control of Mac Basics, take control of Apple Mail, take control of iOS 13. All of these Mac and iOS related things, the books usually run between $9 and $15. They are non-technical in terms of the people who wrote them. They wrote them in a user-friendly way. You might get a book that's 100, 120 pages. You might get a book that's 200 plus pages, but they are easy reading, but not stupid reading. In other words, you're still going to get a lot out of them. They go over, I can't tell you, how much I've done with, with these books. I've learned so much over the last years just reading them. So again, takecontrolbooks.com, takecontrolbooks.com. You can jump in and look at their catalog. Once you purchase a book, then it's yours, and updates, they will give you free updates unless the guy writes or lady writes a completely new version of the book. Then you'll get a discount if you've purchased the previous full version of the book. There is, by the way, a Take Control of Zoom, which I think I put on my Mac for the Blind email list. And I think Keith Reedy put it on the Mac VoiceOver list. But it's, I think it's $14.99. And I think Glenn Fleischman wrote that.
Is anyone continuing Jonathan Mosin's iOS books? Zoom.us has new window.
Okay. Let's see, make sure we have that. Oh, and there's also the Missing Manual series written by David Pogue, Pogue. He has written missing manuals for Mac OS for several years. I'm assuming that the Mac OS Catalina, the missing manual, is out. It's often available on bookshare.org. I believe that the Talking Books Library, NLS, eventually comes out with a copy as well. You can go do a Google search for the Missing Manual series, and I think David's probably got a website or does it through his publisher. I haven't gone to look for it yet. I do have the last one, the Mojave one, but that's definitely a great resource if you're trying to prepare yourself for using a Mac. Just to warn you about David Pogue's book, though, it is serious info. It comes in about 900 plus pages. And for example, when I just spoke about system preferences, if you want to learn about every single system preference and every single preference pane and option you have, knock yourself out. You're going to find it in that book. I just totally got lost trying to read that particular chapter on system preferences. Now, as far as web browsing goes, let me just say this. Safari, as I said earlier, is the web browsing tool you're going to be using on the Mac. It is your browser. There is Google Chrome for Mac that is accessible. And to some extent, you do have, for those folks who use Firefox and Windows, there is a Mozilla Firefox version for the Mac. But for reasons beyond my grasp, they stopped really pushing VoiceOver advances. Like there was a time where they were really working hard to make VoiceOver accessible with Firefox, and to my disappointment, because I was still am a big Firefox user on the Windows side, I really wanted Firefox to be a great web browser so I would have a third tool that I could use on the Mac. And it works. Don't get me, don't get me wrong. It works fine, but it's just slow. If you've got a newer Mac with a real kick butt processor, you probably won't notice it too sluggish. But if you've got an older Mac, you might notice that it bogs down a little bit when you try to do VoiceOver commands for navigation. Now, is Safari perfect? Of course not. No web browser is perfect. It comes down to sometimes that websites are not optimized for Safari. Sometimes it comes down to just the inaccessibility of the website. It doesn't matter whether you're using Windows with JAWS or NVDA or whatever, you're going to run into problems with that website. But again, what I said to you earlier, know your screen reader. I've heard a lot of people on lists wrongly say, oh, the web is so much harder to do on a Mac than it is in Windows. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, yes, of course, I totally agree with that. But if you know how to browse, you use QuickNav, you use the keyboard commands, you use web spots, you do all the different little things I'll be talking about when I cover the actual web browsing, the Safari lesson a couple of weeks from now. I'll get into it in obviously a lot more detail. But if you know how to use your screen reader, web browsing is not a difficult proposition. It really works well on the Mac. I can do things on my Mac just as quickly, just as efficiently, in some cases even faster on the Mac than I can do in Windows. So as far as the other major applications that you're going to find as a new Mac user that may not be familiar to you, as I said, you got Apple Mail, you have Safari. As far as word processing goes, TextEdit is I guess you call it the default word processor that everybody maligns or just kind of shoves aside as being, oh, it's just Notepad or WordPad for the Mac, and it's not. TextEdit is a full-blown word processor. In a lot of ways, it's less complex to try to use than Pages or Microsoft Word on the Mac. So if you just need a basic word processor for doing paperwork, for submitting to classes, unless you have to do pasting objects, doing text boxes, tables, etc., headers, footers, you can get away with using TextEdit. I use TextEdit for all of my state agency reports that I hand in to all the counselors. Everything is written, saved as an RTF document. But you do have Pages, which is the Mac equivalent of Microsoft Word. And of course, you have Office with Word. As of 2016, it is completely accessible on the Mac side. You have your calendar, you have reminders, which if you're coming over from iOS, you should be pretty familiar with that stuff. As I said earlier, you have music, you have TV, you have podcast, you have the voice memos application. You have notes, you have the news application. So there'll be a lot of familiarity if you're an iOS person and you come over to the Mac. In fact, there is a feature that some people take to using from the dock. It's called Launchpad. And what Launchpad does on the Mac is it makes your Mac screen with all your applications visually appear like an iPhone home screen. So you have the grid with all of your, all your apps will be, kind of lined up in a grid format. So once you have it on, you can just VO arrow around and in VO space, And just somebody just asked about the Zoom, the announcements and stuff for people leaving and entering the meetings. The only suggestion I can make is using the 3-finger double tap on your your touchpad if you got a Mac or doing it on your iPhone to mute VoiceOver. There is no setting that I'm aware of that turns off VoiceOver speaking while you're in a meeting. And believe me, I wish I could, because it just distracts.
You can lock your screen.
To everyone, thank you. Zoom.us has new
You can what?
You can lock your screen.
Yeah, but I don't know if that stops the announcements. I get maybe it does in iOS, but I don't know if it on the Mac if you can do that. I'll have to experiment. I've been looking around. Believe me, I've poked around in every setting in Zoom. I thought maybe I could control it in the VoiceOver utility, but as of this moment, I haven't. I'm not. It's not to say that somebody won't find a way that will do it, but I've just not been able to determine how to do that. And whoever it was who asked that question, believe me, it annoys me just as much. Just trying to do this meeting with people coming in and out, and you know, when people write the chat, I'm kind of catching that out of the corner of my ear, so to speak. Now, other things you can do on your Mac effectively, just that comes to mind, is you can blog. I know there are a lot of people out there who are bloggers, and there is a great app on the Mac called Mars Edit that allows you, it's a word for WordPress blogs, to really manage your pages, your posts, uploads, etc. Just asked a question about hearing VoiceOver. The only way other people can hear it is if you're on an open mic. So if you're unmuted and you have an open mic, meaning that the VoiceOver is coming out of the speakers of your computer, everybody will hear it. But if you have earbuds on, like I have, my VoiceOver, you can't hear it as far as I'm aware. But you will hear. That's my laptop's VoiceOver. So I just wanted to leave that as an open speaker, just to let people to hear how VoiceOver sounds. And I'm going to do a little demonstration as soon as I'm finished blabbering with this stuff. But the Mars Edit, as I said, is a great blogging application. I think it'll set you back like $19 from the Mac App Store. And yes, the Mac has an app store just like iOS does. Not to be confused, because you get Mac apps from the Mac App Store, you get iOS apps from the iOS App Store. Sometimes you do have guys who write apps for both platforms. So I believe I've heard rumors that Apple's going to have a thing where if a developer has a Mac and an iOS version of the app, that you can buy a suite and get a discount. But I don't know how true that's going to end up being in the end, because a lot of times in the media, you get a lot of speculation and rumors about what Apple is going to do or is not going to do, and Apple does it completely different when it finally gets announced. So just just to give you a heads up about that. One of the other Mac things I like to tout for people is what's called continuity. The beauty of continuity is that you are able to kind of sync everything across your Apple devices. So in other words, you can start an email on your Mac, and if you got to walk away from your Mac, you can pick it up on your iPhone. If you have it set up where you're logged into the same iCloud account on using this, the same wireless network, you can do text messages on both devices. You can answer your phone on your Mac and use your Mac as like a speakerphone if you wanted to. So it's easy to configure, and it is very effective. There's also, for example, a feature that allows you, it's called the Universal Clipboard. And the Universal Clipboard allows you to copy something on your Mac and paste it into something on your iPhone or vice versa. So, these are the types of things that when you become a Mac user, if you already have an iPhone or an iPad, you will really learn to love quickly, and you'll really love to take advantage of these types of features. My favorite thing is the messaging, being able to answer text messages and iMessages on my Mac. Even if they are Android users, I can still get their messages and I can still respond to their messages, and also the phone calls. Because I'm constantly sitting at my computer during the course of a workday. So it's just easier if I get a cell phone call and I can answer it on the Mac and deal with it without having to grab my phone. So that just makes life a lot easier in my, my estimation. And in iCloud itself, the service, the iCloud service, you can take advantage of if you have multiple Apple devices. So if you have an application like Pages or Numbers, or you get iOS apps that will sometimes be iCloud savvy, where you can, access the files that you save. So in other words, you do a Pages document on the Mac, you can do it, you can pick it up in iOS or vice versa. So that will sometimes be a really nice advantage. And then of course there's iCloud Drive that is kind of like Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, where you get 5 gigabytes of free storage, and then you can purchase additional storage plans. I use iCloud Drive with all of my work files, my business related stuff, because I will sometimes travel to my brother's. One's up in Buffalo, one's locally, but I'll take my computer to there, or to my girlfriend's she lives about a half hour from here. And I'll be able to work with clients because I can access all of, my business files from my Mac or from my iPhone or my iPad, whatever the case might be, or from my different Macs. So I love iCloud Drive. And of course, without getting, too far-fetched here, but you also have like the what's called used to be called, I think it's still called the iTunes Match service, where you can get your music library available through iCloud, so that you can access your music library from any device, anywhere, as long as you have an internet connection, which is really handy. So you're not having to download all your music necessarily onto a specific device if you're afraid of how much, I know people who have music libraries that are like 50 gigs or more.
To everyone, what is Time Machine? Zoom.us has new window.
Time Machine is the backup system, Tariq. It's what is, I mentioned it earlier, one of the studies that were done years ago was when it was Windows and Mac users, that only 16% of people actually back up their data. So Time Machine was Apple's effort to help people with an automatic backup system, so that all you got to do is plug in an external drive to your Mac, run Time Machine, and it will do it automatically for you. Okay, so now we get to the world of VoiceOver. VoiceOver, obviously, as I said, is the Apple screen reader, the Apple version of JAWS, or NVDA, or take your screen reader of choice. And VoiceOver is free. It doesn't cost you anything extra. You can walk into any Apple store, sit down at a Mac, and just press Command F5. Or if it's the touch bars Mac versions, you hold down the Command key and you press the top right corner. They call it the Siri key. It's also the power button. You press that 3 quick times and you will get VoiceOver on or off.
VoiceOver off. VoiceOver on Finder.
So when you fire up VoiceOver, let me slow the speech down because I think it might be too fast for people.
Intonation, voice Alex. Volume 1, pitch 50, intonation 9, voice Alex.
Where am I?
Pitch rate 45%, 40%, Macintosh HD.
Okay, so this is the default voice that comes with VoiceOver for the most part. Sometimes you get the Samantha voice and you have to download. This is called Alex. This has been the Apple voice for the last several macOS operating systems. It's also available in iOS. Some people are not aware that you can download it in VoiceOver settings in iOS. I still think it's one of the best speech, text-to-speech synthesizers, whatever you want to call it, that I've ever encountered. And I use this pretty much primarily on my Mac and iOS devices, though I will mess with some of the other voices when I kind of get bored or whatever. So when you fire up VoiceOver, you have complete access to your Mac. You're going to be having to choose your VoiceOver modifier keys. Now, the modifier keys you hold down to, in conjunction with other keys. No, I don't think I can share the screen, whoever just asked that question. I've been experimenting with this and things go south. unless it's one person who has VoiceOver turned on or their screen reader turned on. That's the only way it will work. And I've not found a really good way to demonstrate this stuff by trying to share my screen with everybody. So hopefully everybody can hear as I do the things here with VoiceOver to just kind of make my points. You know, because like I said, if there was a way I could do it, and believe me, I've done a lot of research and experimentation with this stuff, and I tried doing screen sharing and it just kind of went south. It just didn't work really that well with the people I tried to do it with when I was testing this in theory stuff.
Patricia Solis has left the meeting.
Okay, so as I said, the VoiceOver modifiers, by default, you have two choices. You can either hold down the control and the option keys, which are the second and third keys from left to right on your laptop keyboard, or the first and second keys from left to right on your full-size keyboard. And you do that in conjunction with, let's say, the arrow keys to navigate.
Test Mojave volume, Macintosh HD volume, alias.
So, you know, I'm just navigating my desktop. I have some aliases, which are basically the Mac version of shortcuts. So I have some external drives and I have some network drives that I use on my home network that I make available to all my computers for, you know, music, audiobooks, etc. Everything has its own purpose. You also can use caps lock with as your VoiceOver modifier. So if you don't want to hold down two keys, you can use caps lock. I'm not a big fan of the caps lock myself, but that's personal preference because I'm just so used to using control and option. But if you want to use caps lock, it works perfectly fine. So for example, control option or caps lock D takes you to the dock. So you can navigate your dock by using the VoiceOver arrows, for example.
Siri 2 of 38, launch at 3 of 38, Safari 4 of 38, Mail 5 of 38.
So if I wanted to launch Safari, the VoiceOver modifiers with the space bar will launch an application.
Content 90% loaded.
So Safari has opened and I have mine set to my home page is the Apple website.
Global, visited, Apple, visited, Mac, iPad, iPhone, watch, TV, music.
So I'm just navigating to the right. I'm using control option right arrow. It's going item by item across the page as if you were flicking to the right with the in the iOS world. You also hear little click sounds because I have my VoiceOver configured so that instead of it saying link, link, link all the time, it makes the clicking sound to kind of give me that indicator as well. Just because I like personally, I like audio feedback. I know some people don't like that particular preference. So, you know, you can navigate any you know, website. You want to go to the address bar with Command L.
Open location. HTTPS.
So I'm just going to do
Mac. SORTHE. Period. COM. Studio.com/Mac4DLive/Mac for the blind vertical line 8 place for visually impaired people.
So I loaded my own website.
Close. Mac in heading level 1. Mac for the blind.
So it's as simple as that. And there are ways you can navigate very quickly and efficiently. Again, when I do my session on web browsing and I go into real specific detail using Safari and how to get around websites, I'm going to pick a couple of different websites to just try to demonstrate some of this stuff. But you also have, like I said, Apple Mail, your files and folders. I'm just going to go back to Finder.
Finder, desktop. Macintosh HD volume.
So as I said, Macintosh HD is your, you know, your hard drive, and I'm going to open it with the Control Option space.
Macintosh HD window, column view.
Now there is a concept called interaction on the Mac that is very important. It is very different from the Windows world. When I do my my VoiceOver intro in a couple of weeks, I'm going to really get into some specifics about the types of things you need to interact with. But suffice it to say that when you open the Finder window, you end up on what's called the browser side of the Finder window. Now, the Finder window, as I said, is like my computer. It allows you to go through your files and your folders on your Mac. So visually, you have three parts of the Finder screen. The toolbar, as most most of the apps in the Mac world have a toolbar that runs across the top of every screen. On the left-hand side, you have what's called the sidebar.
Vertical sidebar table.
And on the right-hand side, you have the browser side. So you interact to see what's contained within those areas.
Applications folder. com.apple.time library folder preboot system folder.
So I'm just navigating what's called my root directory. So the root directory is the top level. It's kind of like when you open up the Windows My Computer and you have that top directory that you see. So I'm just going to go back up to applications, and I'm going to go into applications. And the way you do this is you VO right arrow. So here are my apps. I'm just going to go down.
Accessible event host.app, acquisition.app, adapter.app, ABM.app, Adobe Acrobat Reader DC.app, Adobe Digital Editions 2.0.app.
So I'm just, everything is in alphabetical order. If I just jump to, let's just pick a random letter here, S.
Safari.app.
So you can do first letter navigation, or you can do 2 letters. So I'll do TE for text edit.
Tables.app.
Oops.
Application. System.
Let me try that again.
Team Talk 4.app.
Oh, Team Talk comes before text edit in my list. Sorry. But you can do first and second letter navigation to quickly jump down lists. So you don't have to spend all day going down, a list of your, your applications. Now, the other important folder in the root directory
Applications
is the user folder.
users folder.
So the users folders, when you get a Mac, you have a home folder on your computer. Your home folder contains all of your stuff that you will ever own on your Mac. Now, usually the home folder is the name of the person who creates the account. When you do the setup assistant with a brand new Macintosh, one of the things you're going to be asked to do is set up your first account on the Mac. It's an administrator account, meaning that you have rights to do virtually anything that's important for everyday use. So you'll set up an account name and a password. So your home folder will have some variant of your account name unless you specify otherwise. So for me, mine is just called John. Initially, it wanted it to be called John Panarese, one big word, but I just felt it was easier for me just to have it called John. You might find yours will have your full name compressed into one word, but that becomes your home folder. And then inside your home folder is going to be the stuff that you own on your Mac.
Docs group. Downloads. Full Dropbox. Games. Full iCloud Drive. Archive.
So some of these folders I created because I use, as I said earlier, I use iCloud Drive. So I do have my desktop and documents folders in the cloud. I will talk more specifically about this in one of the other lessons coming up on when I talk more about Finder. But iCloud Drive will allow you to upload your documents and desktop folders into iCloud Drive so that they're not on your local Mac. They're not taking up space on your computer. But I did create a folder myself called Docs. And Docs I created just so I could have specific documents that I only need to keep on this Mac, and I don't need to put up in iCloud. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. You can customize your Mac just like you can do in Windows. You can create all the folders, all the subfolders to your heart's desire, and make it your system, organize it the way you want to use it. You can take thumb drives, you can take external drives, and you can have access to the materials. So if you wanted to transfer stuff over from a PC, you could put it on an external drive or a thumb drive, and you would be easily have access to it, and you could copy it onto this into the specific folders that wherever you want to keep it on your Mac side of things. Okay. Now, besides having the let me take a step back and say it this way. Mac VoiceOver is, typically or traditionally a keyboard-driven system. So meaning that you use keyboard commands for the most part. However, if you have a Mac that has the trackpad, or you buy for like your iMac or your Mac Mini, you get the Magic Trackpad, you can use the trackpad commander and the gestures from your iPhone. So if you are a really good, comfortable iPhone user, you can learn to employ most of those gestures to utilize your Mac. The one cool thing that you can do that's different on the Mac side with trackpad is you can customize your own gestures. So in other words, you can add 1, 2, 3, or 4 finger gestures. The one downside to this is it has to include one modifier key. So in other words, command with a single finger flick to the right, or the option key with a 2-finger swipe to the left or right, or up or down. So you pick the gesture and the modifier, and then you can pick from a menu that gives you the different voiceover commands that you can make that gesture do for you. So it allows you to customize a lot of the voiceover commands that are not necessarily available by gestures by default. You can make it then available. So I'll give you an example. What I did, if I hold down the command key and I do a 2-finger swipe to the left or the right, I will interact with items. So, you know, as I said earlier, interaction is a really important concept on the Mac. I'll be talking about in the voiceover lecture on June, I believe it's June the 2nd, the Tuesday. And I'll go into the specifics about interaction and the items that require interaction. But I just made a gesture to make it easier for myself, because by default, if you're using Control Option as your modifiers, Control Option Shift down arrow or Control Option Shift up arrow is how you would typically interact or stop interacting with items. So if I am using my trackpad, I just made it a little bit easier for myself. And you can make keyboard commands easier too by using some of the features, like, as I mentioned earlier on in this lesson about, I said numpad commander. You can also use keyboard commander. And you can use trackpad commander as alternative options if you don't like the fact that some voiceover commands require that you press, 4 and 5 keys at the same time. Now, there is also a voiceover quick start tutorial. When you fire up VoiceOver for the first time, you most likely are going to be asked whether you want to go into that quick start tutorial. I would strongly suggest for the people new to the Mac and VoiceOver, try the tutorial out. It's not going to teach you, quote unquote, everything, but it will give you enough of a familiarity and introduction to a lot of VoiceOver and macOS concepts to sort of get you going out of the gate. So it's a 20 parts, like a 20 screen interactive tutorial that has you do basic things as, quote unquote, exercises, and then you move on to the next screen. The cool thing about the tutorial is, you can quit it at any time with the escape key. So if you get bored, because I don't expect anybody in their right mind to try to go through all 20 screens in one shot, you can always come back to it from the VoiceOver help system, and I'll mention that in a second. Then you can choose whether you want to start from where you left off, or if you want to start it over again, if you're insane enough to do that, you can hit the left arrow or the right arrow. Now, the right arrow will also skip screens forward, and you can also skip backwards using the left arrow. So that would be, very useful if you decide that you want to redo an exercise, or maybe you come across something in a tutorial that's, I know how to do this. Okay. So that's how the quick start tutorial. Now, the VoiceOver help system is accessed with VOH.
VoiceOver help menu.
And if you go down, it's a vertical menu.
Control commands help menu. Control keyboard help control option. Quick start tutorial.
The quick start tutorial is at the bottom of the help menu. The other options here are all part of the help system, like the user guide and commands help. Again, I'll be going more significantly into this menu when we talk about the VoiceOver introduction lesson in a couple of weeks. I don't want to, repeat some stuff to people that are also planning on attending that particular lesson. I just want this lesson to help you get up and running, at least to be not afraid to really try to use your Mac and try to get going with VoiceOver. There's a couple people that have written to me I don't know if you're on this conference at the moment or not, but have said to me, oh, I got a Mac a couple of years ago. I tried to use it, but then I gave up on it. Or I've been afraid to turn it on because I don't know how to use it. So the pointed purpose of this particular lesson was hopefully to get people at least oriented to their Mac, know what the Mac can do, know some of the terminology of their Mac, and get themselves up and running with VoiceOver to a point where, you know, where they're at least able to start using the applications. But one thing I will tell you as a trainer, and again, this is my personal philosophy, I am a systematic trainer. In other words, I believe in building systems for people. I take a very methodical approach to teaching. I like people to learn foundational stuff. A lot of times people want to go, oh, I want to know how to web browse. I want to know how to go on Amazon and buy, you know, this or that, or I want to know how to do my mail right away. Mike's, the philosophy I like to say to people is you got to learn to crawl before, you know, you got to learn to crawl before you can walk, and walk before you can run. So I like people to have a foundational aspect to their learning process before they really start to jump into applications and, you know, try to do things. Because if you don't have a solid foundation, the first good wind that blows your way is going to knock down the whole building. So if you run into one problem in Safari that frustrates you, it'll be a setback. And people, you know, when you learn to unfortunately hate something, you tend to not want to do it. So this is why I teach people from a very foundational, structured standpoint. I like people to know the basics before they move on to their applications. And you'll notice that the way my audio tutorials are structured is I try to do the same approach with every app and you know, and every topic that I cover. So hopefully that this particular lesson, you know, I was able to do that for you guys to at least get you started, you know, with your Macs, or if you're interested in a Mac, you know, you at least know what to expect. All right. So what we'll do for the remainder of this lesson before my voice kicks out, apparently, is let's I know Sienna and Ali and Cliff have been probably keeping track of some of the questions I did not hear from folks. So let's deal with a couple of them.
So I have a question here from Mike, and he was wondering if you could repeat, please, the URL for the Take Control books.
Okay, that's www.takecontrolbooks.com. If you want to make it easier on yourself, do www.takecontrolbooks.com/catalog. And that will take you directly to the listing of all their hundreds and hundreds of books that are available.
And there was also a question in there that I saw a while back here, John. Does anybody use Jonathan Mosen's book on Zoom? And
I have.
yeah, I have too.
That's a great resource. Jonathan does a great job. The only downside is I don't think he does much on the Mac. I think he does a lot with iOS and Windows. I don't think he's a very strong Mac user. So I don't think he really mentions too much about
He's
the
not.
Mac.
He wrote a 4-page article about 4 years ago about about why he went back to Windows. I mean, it was an extensive article too. I mean, he went into
Well, I mean, my reaction to that is basically Freedom Scientific. That's all I'm going to say. You know, he's been in Freedom Scientific's pocket for as far as when I was first in this industry back in 1994, and I always knew
it goes back that far.
He would never embrace the Mac and voice. So I'm surprised he embraced iOS, to be honest with you. But, you know, he's a great guy. I'm not. Please understand. I'm not criticizing him. I'm not knocking him. People, people know where their bread is buttered. You know, and that's,
I've had him on a couple of my podcasts. He is a great guy. And, so I mean.
Very knowledgeable, and I definitely Meet Me in the Cloud is a great resource. I just mentioned Take Control of Zoom because it is written from the Mac perspective.
Yeah.
And
no,
one more question, actually.
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, one more question, and then I'll let you guys go ahead. But there's a question from Janice, and she says, I'm an iOS user. Is there a typing tutor app for the Mac?
Yes, there are a few of them. My understanding is that I believe APH has made their typing tutor, the one that everybody uses for Windows. I believe there's a Mac version of that, and I can't remember what the name of it is. But Typey, yeah, that's and it is available for the Mac. There also is a it's Talking Typer, actually. Yes, whatever it was. Thank you. Yeah, and I know that that's a Mac version. There's also one called Keystroke that I might be in the Mac App Store, but there's one called X-Type that's really good in the Mac App Store. So there are a few typing tutors that are accessible to VoiceOver users for the Mac.
Well, there are a few more. There were a few more in there as well. A few more questions as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I heard some questions I couldn't answer, so I just want to make sure I cover people's questions.
Yeah,
Is all these books controlled for VoiceOver?
No, they're not written from the VoiceOver perspective, but I don't know if I should say this. I got to keep my mouth shut. I'm sorry, but that, let me just put it this way, that might be rectified a little bit in the near future.
Okay, Barney.
But they are, just because they're not written from the VoiceOver perspective doesn't mean that a VoiceOver user can't take advantage of them. You learn a lot just by reading them. They're written by a lot of long-time Apple people going back several years. Glenn Fleischman, Joe Kessel, Sharon, and I'm going to butcher her last name, Benedetto. All of these folks, Renee, Richie, they're all long-time Apple people who write a lot of these take control books.
John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Two questions. Firstly, you mentioned a book, I think, about something about setting all the preferences. You said it was a very extensive book on setting all the preferences in terms of VoiceOver.
Yes, not in VoiceOver. It's just for system preferences in general. It's David Pogue's The Missing Manual, macOS Catalina, The Missing Manual.
Missing Manual, right.
Yes.
Brilliant, okay. And the other question that I have is, you mentioned that a full keyboard is slightly better than a standard, than a mini laptop keyboard, as it were, that you might get on a MacBook. Would you recommend purchasing an external keyboard?
If you're not traveling, if you're not traveling and it's something you don't mind, I think there are a lot of advantages to having a full-size keyboard. But again, I don't like to tell people what to do, and everybody's circumstances are different. But I have, the Apple Magic Keyboard. It's a full-size keyboard, and I also have a couple of direct connected USB Apple full-size keyboards that I will use on occasion, because I just like having the numpad. I like having, the keys a little bit more spread out. I like the 6-pack, because I do a lot of text work, working with documents. So I like to be able to navigate by sentence and paragraph a lot more easily.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm a full-size guy too, John.
Yeah, I just think it makes life easier. But again, I have clients who are very comfortable using those laptop keyboards, and they do everything they need to do.
Yeah, no, I always say that's always, that's the stand I've been taking as well on things, that everybody's use case is different, and not everybody's going to like every device.
Right, and that person who just asked about the keyboards, I'd have to pass that one along to Cliff, because I don't know, other than Logitech, what other keyboards out there can connect to multiple devices.
There's the Matthias wireless keyboard.
There's another one called the Canis keyboard, but I'm really not a fan of that keyboard because, one, the option and command keys are separated with the function key in the middle, and two, it just doesn't switch well. the Logitech K11 that would be able to pair with the Mac. I have not seen that one sold in the last year or so because I was trying to replace the one that I broke and dropped down the stairs, and one of my kids ran over with their bike and whatever. But I ended up getting another Logitech keyboard that's an updated version, but it's specifically designed for a desktop because it has a numpad, which I am not a fan of, but I've gotten used to it. But it switches with 3 devices, and it's a very, very reliable keyboard. Plus the fact, and John can attest to this, with the Apple Magic, or not the Apple Magic, but the Apple full-size keyboard, the function key is up in the 6-pack. On this keyboard, the function key is actually between the command and what is this other, and on the right side of the keyboard. So it's actually very well placed. It makes it easier to reach when you need to use it, and it actually toggles the function keys on and off with the escape key if you use it. So I've gotten used to it, been using it for a couple of months now, and I love it. So that's one of the keyboards that like I said, I hate the numpad, but I've gotten used to it, and I've actually found that it's easier to use the Mac with certain commands with it too, because they call me the keyboard king. But when I got that numpad, it was a transition because I had to use one in about 6 years. So
It's Sienna here, and I find too that I'm able to adapt to different sized keyboards. Mind you, when I'm sitting at my desk, I tend to prefer a full-sized keyboard with the numpad. And when I had my Mac, unfortunately, it died on me. Hoping to get a new one eventually. Yeah, but I'm one of those people who, when I'm actually sitting at the desk, I prefer a full-size keyboard. But when I'm on the go, and I've just got my iPad here, and in that case I use a Logitech keys to go. So some people I've noticed are able to adapt to different keyboards, whereas some tend to prefer one or the other.
Yeah, I like the full size, the Apple Magic keyboard because it's nice and flat and compact, and I can stick it in the bottom of my suitcase or in my backpack, and I don't have to worry about it taking up too much space, and it's durable. I'm not worried too much about it breaking unless some, like what happened to Cliff. I haven't had anybody run over my devices with the bike yet. I'm sure it will happen with my nephews and niece, but it hasn't happened yet.
And another question, actually, 2 questions, John, if I may. Sienna here again. You mentioned the trackpad, and so just so that I understand correctly, because I've never actually used the trackpad before. I had a Mac. My first Mac was a MacBook Pro, but I wasn't able to use the trackpad with it. It was an older one. And my second Mac, which is the one that unfortunately stopped working, it was a Mac Mini, so I was only using it with the keyboard. But my question is, so you mentioned you need the modifier key. You need to use the trackpad in combination with the modifier key. Is that when you're using, so just to clarify, is that when you're using all of the gestures?
No. That's only custom.
Turn it on?
No, that's only if you're going to invent your own custom gestures.
Oh,
so in other words, the gestures out of the box work without a modifier in the standard way that you would expect with from the iOS world. But if you're going to invent your own custom gestures, you have to pick a modifier. I usually use Command because it's it's to the left or the right of the space bar, easy to find.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And the other question, well, not really a question per se, it's more a comment. I appreciate that you mentioned the touch bar, and that's something else that I'm not, I haven't really had any experience with.
Yeah, neither have I, actually.
I remember actually.
Yes, they do.
A client coming in. Yeah, I remember a client coming into the office one time, and he asked me, would you mind helping me with my Mac? I just got this thing, and he said, I'm losing my sight and I'm not sure how to get VoiceOver up and running. And I was thinking, okay, normally Command F5, but he had one of the newer MacBook
Yes,
Pros with
yes.
With the touch bars.
Yeah, you have to hold
With
down the
touch
command
bar.
key. Yeah, you have to hold down command and tap just what I did before on my laptop. You got to tap that top right. It's they call it the Siri key, but it's also the power button. You tap that 3 quick times while you have command held down, and that will start or turn off. It's like doing command F5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that
That's
goes in our
awesome,
notes.
yeah.
That goes in our notes, Sienna, for
Yeah,
future
for
clients.
sure.
That
Yeah,
goes in
no,
our notes.
absolutely.
You know, we're gonna.
Absolutely. I mean, I ended up having to plug in. Luckily, I had my I had a desktop keyboard in my backpack with me, but
Right.
but
Now,
Mike
Mike Thomas, before, because I want to make sure I heard Mike Thomas ask a question about whether I still use Windows and if there's any circumstances that I use Windows over Mac. I use Windows because I have to train. I have an HK Helen Keller client contract with New York State, so I will work with Windows with clients for that. As far as when do I use Windows over the Mac, I would sometimes just for experimentation. Like if I'm having trouble on a website on my Mac side, I might fire up Windows just to see if it's a better perspective, if it might work better. Sometimes I like to check things on the Windows side to see if things are different. I will, I'm never going to be one who's going to bash an operating system simply because I said earlier, it's a tool. Everybody who's blind needs tools to get their jobs, their work done. So I'm never going to tell a person, oh, Windows sucks, or, it just, to me, it's pointless.
John, this is Ibrahim. A question, if I may.
Yes.
So I
Wait.
had a 2012 MacBook Pro that I bought a couple of years ago, and I'm wondering what your advice is. Like, if I wanna fix it up, I guess, is that a good idea to put a new battery in it, add RAM and all that stuff? How risky is that, and what do you recommend on that?
As the Mac laptops have progressed, I don't know how easy it is to do that like on your own. Maybe a 2012 might be easier to do like a RAM upgrade. It's funny because Apple, because they've made these devices so compact and all the electronics and stuff is so tight that it used to be you had a lot of tinkerers who could who were really good at taking the RAM out, replacing the battery, replacing the hard drive. Like I remember I had an old MacBook Pro from many years ago that a friend of mine replaced with a 512 back then, 512 gigabyte spinning drive, which was like, wow, that's like amazing, But I don't know, you'd have to look around with a 2012 to
Well, how about
to see whether you can do that. I mean, at the most, if you have an Apple authorized dealer, you can always go to them and find out. But you can do some, what it is, iFixit.com. Go to iFixit.com and check that out.
Okay, and one other question. I'm thinking about a MacBook Air because I don't want to get a touch bar. Would you recommend, what's the latest high-end MacBook Air I could get? The
one that's available as the base system I mentioned, because it's using the Intel 10th generation.
Okay.
And that I would maybe, it depends on what you're doing, but I mean, it's 256 gigabytes of SSD.
I'm looking to do like audio editing, mostly, and audio work, I guess.
You can get away with an Air. You just probably want to make sure you got more size. You might want to jack up maybe the processor one level, something like that.
Yeah.
I just picked up the 2018 Mac Mini, and I got 256 a terabyte, and I did spend a little money because I had it the 32 gigs of RAM.
So what's the difference between the MacBook Pro and Air? I mean, like, what's the power difference?
I like the Mac Mini, and John, you probably agree. I like the Mac Mini because you can get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, you can get because it also starts as a quad core processor, where I think the Air is still only a dual core at the start.
Okay, that's because somebody told me they wouldn't look at my Mac Air compared to the MacBook Pro right now.
My dad just got an iMac with a default resolution of 2550 by 1440.
In-message screensaver window.
And John, there's another question here from iPhone Inc. Is there a way to turn off Is there a way to turn on and off the trackpad?
Yes, if you hold down the VoiceOver keys, Control Option, or if you're using caps lock, and on the trackpad you do the 2-finger twist clockwise, that will turn on Trackpad Commander. And if you do the 2-finger twist counterclockwise, that will turn off Trackpad Commander.
John?
Yes.
Tarek here again from the UK. Just a couple of quick questions. You just mentioned the trackpad. Is it possible to leave the trackpad on all the time? Because when I've been playing with it, I've turned on the trackpad, and then I've turned off my machine, and when I've come back to it, turned my machine back on, and the trackpad's off again. Is it possible to leave it on?
I thought it stays. I was always under the impression that if you turn Trackpad Commander on, it stayed on.
Right.
I'll have to experiment with that, to be honest with you. I was just under the impression that it would stay on. It was a setting that persisted.
Okay, thank you. I'll play with it again. My other question, when I've been playing with the VoiceOver startup thing that you mentioned earlier, it talks you through different menus and whatever, and I've played with that. One of the things that I just can't get my head around is the VoiceOver keys with using the up-down arrow key to activate various menus, if you see what I mean. Did you call it
menus?
Not pop-up menus, no. You know when you just, there's a special word that they use, and it's slipping my mind. My apologies. Thank you, interacting, that's the word. Yeah, absolutely, interactive. That just winds me up so much, Connie. You know, it really, really winds me up because
you shouldn't have to interact with the menu, though. You should just be able to VO up and VO down arrow a menu. You shouldn't really have to,
but when you actually select it, what I mean is you select it, you've got to do the activating, don't you?
Well, you do VO space to select the item, yeah.
Yeah, you know, in terms of the shot, I've sort of been watching you use it. I guess you're not using the interacting, you just use the shortcuts, or because you're so familiar with it.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Like I said, remember what I said earlier about knowing your screen reader. You know, once you know your screen reader, you find ways to cut corners and make your life a lot easier.
You are currently in the text field inside of
Right.
John,
Okay.
Mr. John, I have a question.
press Control Option.
Yeah.
Down arrow.
It's Helga.
Right arrow.
Okay.
Well, I use the no. I have a numpad, a Bluetooth numpad that work properly with VoiceOver. I don't know if you heard of the Belkin numpads. Belkin company's numpad.
Yeah. So you have. Yeah. Okay.
The Bluetooth. Can that work with Can that work with the numpad commanders?
Here's the problem with the numpads, with the Bluetooth ones. Sometimes you can do like the first, like in other words, if you just press the 1, the 2, the plus, the minus. But the thing you can do with numpad commander is you can do like option, command, or shift as a modifier for second or third level numpad commands. With Bluetooth numpads, they don't always work. So you have to be careful with that.
Oh, okay. But
okay, I don't mean to cut you guys short, but I really have to get moving here. Like I said, I got a doctor's appointment for my mom. I got to be available for.
John, it's Ibrahim.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much, John. And
it
was
you're
a
very
great,
welcome. And if anybody's questions I did not answer, you know, please contact me and ask them in email, because I know I heard a couple of other people ask questions.
Yeah.
I
really
don't want to
appreciate
miss
it.
anybody's questions, so please do send me any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
thank you so much.
All right, guys, and I'll see most
It
of you
was
guys on
great,
the second.
and I
Good luck
really
with your
appreciate.
appointment.
I really
Thank you very much, John.
appreciate all the work
Okay,
you
you're very
do,
welcome,
and
guys.
I learned a
Thank you.
lot.
Thank you, John, and I will be in touch by email.
I learned a lot too.
Is
Thank you,
anybody else
guys.
taking this meeting over, or are we out?